Hello, and welcome to the Little Church World. Today's sermon is about a very difficult question that anyone could ask. It's about faith. Now, a couple of years ago, one of my work colleagues had a friend who was a soldier in the British Army and then went to Afghan. Unfortunately, they were killed while serving their country. And then my colleague came back and said to me, "Why do you have faith?" Now, like I said, this is probably one of the most difficult questions that a Christian could be answered. And it's probably one of the main reasons why people either don't believe or they lose their faith because of bad things happen. So I thought I would start looking into, why do I have faith? To start with, I thought I'll see what an actual definition of faith is. I went onto Wikipedia and it said, faith is trust, hope and belief in the goodness, trustworthiness or reliability of a person, concept or entity. Now that is just an internet definition, and I want to see what the Bible had said or what faith is. In Hebrews 11:1, it says, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." And I think that is very true of what faith is. We cannot see it. We cannot physically show it, but it's in our soul. It's a bit like oxygen in the air. If you said to someone, "Does oxygen exist?" we all believe it does, because we know it's there. If we went high up into a mountain, the altitude and the oxygen would drop, and we would feel the effects, because we would struggle to breathe. Well, faith is the same. It's something you can't physically show, it's something you can't physically see, but it's within us, it's deep in our soul. Now, to help me with this question about faith, I found this book, The Case for Faith by Lee Strobel. Now, Lee Strobel's first book was called The Case for Christ, and at the time he was a journalist and an atheist, and he went out to prove, or tried to prove, that Christ really wasn't the Son of God, and in fact the resurrection wasn't true. In his research, he interviewed many professors and theologians in vast universities in the UK and US, and at the end of this, he came to one conclusion, that Christ was in fact the Son of God, and the resurrection did happen, and all the evidence pointed to this. Now, because of this, he then became a Christian, and he is now a teacher pastor in California, as well as an author of many other books, including this book here. Now, the book, The Case of Faith, consists of 8 objections with why people should question faith. But I'm just going to focus on the first objection, which is, since evil and suffering exist, a loving God cannot. Now, within the book, Lee Strobel put a very good quote as to why people struggle with faith. And it says, "But faith isn't always that easy, even for people who desperately want it. Some people hunger for spiritual certainty, yet something hinders them from experiencing it. They wish they could taste that kind of freedom, but obstacles block their path. Their hearts want to soar to God, their intellects keep them securely tied down." And that's what a lot of people feel like. Their heart longs for faith, but their intellect stops them. Because a lot of people think, if there is a loving God, then why is there so much pain, evil and suffering in the world? Well, I personally believe the reason for evil and suffering is because of us. God created humans to have free will. That is why Adam and Eve in the garden ate that fruit, because they had the free will to do it. God did not choose us to be a robot, because if we were a robot, we wouldn't be able to show him the love, the relationship and the affection that he also longs for from us to him. God gave us free will, allowing us to sin or not to sin, because that's what free will is. And if you think of most of the evilness in the world, whether it's rape, murder, robbery, abuse, poverty, even famine, is due to us. I remember when I was a young boy, I was speaking to my dad about this very question about a news bulletin with all the poverty and the famine in the world. And I turned around to my dad and said, "Dad, why are there poor people and people without enough food?" He said, "Well, that's just the way it is." And I said, "But Dad, don't we print money?" He said, "Yes, we do." And I said, "Well, why don't we just print enough for everyone? We could stop poverty straight away. There's enough food in the world. We could give everyone the food that they need." But we don't. And that is one of the reasons I think that we are to blame for all the suffering as well. God didn't create evil and suffering. We did. A lot of people find that very difficult to accept, that we are to fault. But that's because people don't want to take responsibility for their actions. And this isn't a personal attack on individuals. It's us as a nation, as a race, as human beings. And because of this, Matthew 24:10-13, it says, "At that time many will turn away from faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But whoever stands firm to the end will be saved." And I think that is very true with life today. There are many false prophets out there. Not only people saying that there are certain people, but just pop stars, movie stars. We're always trying to find someone to center our attention on. And Paul, in 1 Timothy 4:1, also said, "The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things that taught by demons." Now, I'm not trying to say that certain pop stars and movie stars are demons or evil spirits, but what I do say is they're a distraction from God. And that is one thing you must remember. The only person we should worship is God, not human beings. Now, natural disasters is more tricky. And I'm sure some people were saying, well, what do we say about natural disasters? And I have to admit, that is a more difficult reason to try and understand why they happen. But one of the best illustrations I found was from the book, The Case of Faith again. And the illustration was that a bear was trapped, and the hunter may have put the trap there, but out of sympathy and mercy, he decided to free the bear. Initially, he went up to the bear to try and gain its confidence. But the bear was scared, was angry, was afraid, was hurt, and he thought the hunter was there to do more harm. So he tried to attack the hunter because he thought he was under attack. Because of this, the hunter then had to tranquilize the bear. To do this, he had to shoot him with drugs. Again, the bear thought he was being attacked and tried to be harmed. And again, he was thinking, why is the hunter doing this to me? I have done nothing out of him. Even though the hunter was trying to help the bear out of compassion and sympathy. Once the bear was semi-conscious, the hunter had to then push the bear's paw further into the trap to try and release the spring and the mechanism to free the bear. Once again, you can fully understand why the bear would think that the hunter is really trying to hurt him even further and put him through more suffering. And because of that, he just hated the hunter even more and just wanted to hurt the hunter as well. And why did the bear come to this conclusion? Because it's a bear, and we are human. And that is how I see us. Human beings are the bear, and God is the human. We cannot understand, just as much the bear could not understand what the hunter was doing. At times, we will not understand why God allows things to happen in this world. We will not understand it, and we may not want to understand it, and we might prefer to turn away from him or curse him. But you have to remember that compared to God, we are just a simple bear, and we may not understand why things happen. But as the bear, could have trusted the hunter, we can also trust God. We must trust God, because sometimes there will be no reason for the things happening in this world, but we have to trust God. And if you think about it, a lot of people have their greatest faith when they're suffering the most. How many of us turn to God when we are struggling, whether with health, finance, relationships, whatever it is? That is normally the biggest time we turn to God. Even people that aren't Christians, you hear kneeling down and praying and hoping that God hears them. So what do we do at times of suffering and when we feel we're under attack? Well, Ephesians 6:16 talks about, Ephesians 6 in general talks about the armour of God. And 6:16 says, "In addition to this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one." And that's important to remember. God has given us armour to protect us from the evil and suffering in this world. And in 1 Timothy 6:12, it also says, "Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called when you were made by your good confession in the presence of many witnesses." If we do take that good fight and don't surrender, the glorious God will give us are amazing, and he will always look after us. And if we do this, great things will happen. Again, Paul wrote in 2 Timothy 4:7-8, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." So if we do go the journey, if we do take that good fight, and we do finish the race, God will show us splendour, and he will crown us in his presence. Well, how can God allow all this suffering? He did for us. Do not forget, God knows what suffering is. He sent his only son, Jesus, to the cross for us. He went through the greatest suffering for us. Jesus went on the cross to take our sin away, not his sin, our sin. And it was always God's plan. In the Old Testament, in Psalm 22, 6-8, it says, "But I am a worm, not a human being. I am scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts the Lord," they say. "Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since the delights in him." God knows what suffering is. He experienced the greatest suffering that any of us could ever experience. And he did it all for us, just so we can have no sin and spend eternity with him. And he's still accepting all our suffering and sin to this day because of the cross. Now you have to remember, good can come from evil. At the time of the crucifixion, nobody could have understood how any good could come from Jesus dying on that cross. They were all confused and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. But by Jesus dying on that cross, it allowed the gates of heaven to open, allowing all of us to walk through them and have eternal life. So remember, the greatest tragedy in history brought about the most glorious event in history. So if God can turn the ultimate evil into the ultimate good, then we must remember that our suffering, our pain that we might be experiencing, he can also turn for good. And also, here's a question. If anyone asks you, why does God allow so much poverty, famine, pain, violence, injustice, when he could really do something about it? Maybe we should answer, I'm afraid he will ask us the same question. Why do we allow so much suffering to happen in this world when we can easily stop it? Why do we go out to hurt each other so much for no reason at all? And I think that is a very powerful answer to that question. I would like to close with a poem by Mary Stevenson in 1936 called Footprints in the Sand. One night I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Many scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each scene I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were 2 sets of footprints, other times there was one only. This bothered me because I noticed that during the low periods of my life, when I was suffering from anguish, sorrow, or defeat, I could only see one set of footprints. So I said to the Lord, "You promised me, Lord, that if I followed you, you would walk with me always. But I have noticed that during the most trying periods of my life, there has only been one set of footprints in the sand. Why, when I needed you most, have you not been there for me?" The Lord replied, "The years when you've seen only one set of footprints, my child, is when I carried you." And that's, I think, what we really have to remember. At times of sorrow, the Lord is still with us. He might not feel like he's with us, but maybe he's actually carrying us through those difficult times. If you are not a Christian yet, and something in this message has led you to the point where you would like to explore the Christian faith further, or if you are a Christian and the message has touched you and you want to answer a question of some form, then please feel free to email us at admin@thelittlechurchworld.org. We will then do all we can to help answer any questions or to give you further information about Christianity.